Welcome back to Major Intonio's presentation of My Autobiography by Benito Mussolini. Chapter 2, My Father.
My father took a profound interest in my development. Perhaps I was much more observed by his paternal attention than I thought. We became much more knit together by common interests as my mind and body approached maturity. In the first place, I became fascinated by the steam threshing machines, which were just then, for the first time, being introduced into our agricultural life. With my father, I went to work to learn the mechanism and tasted, as I had never tasted before, the quiet joy of becoming a part of the working creative world. Machinery has its fascinations, and I can understand how an engineer of a railway locomotive or an oiler in the hold of a ship may feel that a machine has a personality, sometimes irritating, sometimes friendly, with an inexhaustible generosity and helpfulness, power and wisdom. But manual labor in my father's blacksmith shop was not the only common interest we shared. It was inevitable that I should find a clearer understanding of those political and social questions which, in the midst of discussions with the neighbors, had appeared to me as unfathomable, and hence a stupid world of words. I could not follow as a child the arguments of lengthy debates around the table, nor did I grasp the reasons for the watchfulness and measures taken by the police. But now, in an obscure way, it all appeared as connected with the lives of strong men who not only dominate their own lives, but also the lives of their fellow creatures. Slowly but fatally, I was turning my spirit and my mind to new political ideals destined to flower for a time. I began with young eyes to see that the tiny world about me was feeling uneasiness under the pinch of necessity. A deep and secret grudge was darkening the hearts of the common people. A country gentry of mediocrity in economic usefulness and of limited intellectual contribution were hanging upon the multitudes a weight of unjustified privileges. These were sad, dark years, not only in my own province, but for other parts of Italy. I must have the marks upon my memory of the resentful and furtive protests of those who came to talk with my father, some with bitterness of facts, some with a newly devised hope for some reform. It was then, while I was still in my early teens, that my parents, after many serious talks, ending with a rapid family council, turned the rudder of my destiny in a new direction. They said that my manual work did not correspond to their ambitions for me, to their ability to aid me, nor did it fit my own capacities. My mother had a phrase which remains in my ears: "He promises something." At the time, I was not very enthusiastic about that conclusion. I had no real hunger for scholastic endeavor. I did not feel that I would languish if I did not go to a normal school and did not prepare to become a teacher. But my family were right. I had developed some capacities as a student and could increase them. I went to the normal school at a place called Forlimpopoli. I remember my arrival in that small city. The citizens were cheerful and industrious, good at bargaining, tradesmen and middlemen. The school, however, had a greater distinction. It was conducted by Valfredo Carducci, brother of the great writer Giosuè Carducci, who at that time was harvesting his laurels because of his poetry and his inspiration drawn from Roman classicism. There was a long stretch of study ahead of me. To become a master, to have a teacher's diploma, meant 6 years of books and pencils, ink and paper. I confess that I was not very assiduous. The bright side of those years of preparation to be a teacher came from my interest in reforming educational methods, and even more in an interest begun at that time and maintained ever since, an intense interest in the psychology of human masses, the crowd. I was, I believe, unruly, and I was sometimes indiscreet. Youth has its passing restlessness and follies. Somehow I succeeded in gaining forgiveness. My masters were understanding and on the whole generous, but I have never been able to make up my mind how much of the indulgence accorded to me came from any hope they had in me, or how much came from the fact that my father had acquired an increasing reputation for his moral and political integrity. So the diploma came to me at last. I was a teacher. Many are the men who have found activity in political life who began as teachers. But then I saw only the prospect of the hard road of job hunting, letters of recommendation, scraping up a backing of influential persons, and so on. In a competition for a teacher's place at Gualtieri, in the province of Reggio Emilia, I was successful. I had my taste of it. I taught for a year. On the last day of the school year, I dictated an essay. I remember its thesis. It was, "By persevering, you arrive." For that, I obtained the praise of my superiors. So school was closed. I did not want to go back to my family. There was a narrow world for me, with affection to be sure, but restricted. There in Prodapio, one could neither move nor think without feeling at the end of a short rope. I had become conscious of myself, sensitive to my future. I felt the urge to escape. Money I had not, merely a little. Courage was my asset. I would be in exile. I crossed the frontier. I entered Switzerland. It was in this wander life, now full of difficulties, toil, hardship, and restlessness, that developed something in me. It was the milestone which marked my maturity. I entered into this new era as a man and politician. My confident soul began to be my support. I conceded nothing to pious demagoguery. I allowed myself, humble as was my figure, to be guided by my innate proudness, and I saw myself in my own mental dress. To this day I thank difficulties. They were more numerous than the nice, happy incidents, but the latter gave me nothing. The difficulties of life have hardened my spirit. They have taught me how to live. For me, it would have been dreadful and fatal if on my journey forward I had by chance fallen permanently into the chains of comfortable bureaucratic employment. How could I have adapted myself to that smug existence in a world bristling with interest and significant horizons? How could I have tolerated the halting progress of promotions, comforted and yet irritated by the thoughts of an old-age pension at the end of the dull road? Any comfortable cranny would have sapped my energies. These energies, which I enjoy, were trained by obstacles and even by bitterness of soul. They were made by struggle, not by the joys of the pathway. My stay in Switzerland was a welter of difficulties. It did not last long, but it was angular, with harsh points. I worked with skill as a laborer. I worked usually as a mason and felt the fierce, grim pleasure of construction. I made translations from Italian into French and vice versa. I did whatever came to hand. I looked upon my friends with interest or affection or amusement. Above all, I threw myself headforemost into the politics of the emigrant, of refugees, of those who sought solutions. In politics, I never gained a penny. I detest those who live like parasites, sucking away at the edges of social struggles. I hate men who grow rich in politics. I knew hunger, stark hunger, in those days. But I never bent myself to ask for loans, and I never tried to inspire the pity of those around me, nor of my own political companions. I reduced my needs to a minimum, and that minimum, and sometimes less, I received from home. With a kind of passion, I studied social sciences. Pareto was giving a course of lectures in Lausanne on political economy. I looked forward to every one. The mental exercise was a change from manual labor. My mind leaped toward this change, and I found pleasure in learning. For here was a teacher who was outlining the fundamental economic philosophy of the future. Between one lesson and another, I took part in political gatherings. I made speeches. Some intemperance in my words made me undesirable to the Swiss authorities. They expelled me from 2 cantons. The university courses were over. I was forced into new places, and not until 1922, at the Conference of Lausanne, after I was Premier of Italy, did I see again some of my old haunts, filled with memories colorful or drab. To remain in Switzerland became impossible. There was the yearning for home which blossoms in the hearts of all Italians. Furthermore, the compulsory service in the army was calling me. I came back. There were greetings, questions, all the incidents of the return of an adventurer. And then I joined the regiment, a Bersaglieri regiment at the historic city of Verona. The Bersaglieri wear green cock feathers in their hats. They are famous for their fast pace, a kind of monotonous and ground-covering dog trot, and for their discipline and spirit. I liked the life of a soldier. The sense of willing subordination suited my temperament. I was preceded by a reputation of being restless, a fire-eater, a radical, a revolutionist. Consider then the astonishment of the captain, the major, and my colonels, who were compelled to speak of me with praise. It was my opportunity to show serenity of spirit and strength of character. Verona, where my regiment was garrisoned, was and always will remain a dear Venetian city, reverberating with the past, filled with suggestive beauties. It found in my own temperament an echo of infinite resonance. I enjoyed its aromas as a man, But also as a private soldier, I entered with vim into all the drills and the most difficult exercises. I found an affectionate regard for the mass, for the whole, made up of individuals, for its maneuvers and the tactics, the practice of defense and attack. My capacity was that of a simple soldier, but I used to weigh the character, abilities, and individualities of those who commanded me. All Italian soldiers, to a certain extent, do this. I learned in that way how important it is for an officer to have a deep knowledge of military matters and to develop a fine sensitiveness to the ranks, and to appreciate in the masses of our men our stern Latin sense of discipline, and to be susceptible to its enchantments. I can say that in every regard I was an excellent soldier. I might have taken up the courses for non-commissioned officers, but destiny, which dragged me from my father's blacksmith shop to teaching, and from teaching to exile, and from exile to discipline, now decreed that I should not become a professional soldier. I had to ask for leave. At the time I swallowed the greatest sorrow in my life. It was the death of my mother. One day, my captain took me aside. He was so considerate that I felt in advance something impending. He asked me to read a telegram. It was from my father. My mother was dying. He urged my return. I rushed to catch the first train. I arrived too late. My mother was in death's agony. But from an almost imperceptible nod of her head, I realized that she knew I had come. I saw her endeavor to smile. Then her head slowly drooped, and she had gone. All the independent strength of my soul, all my intellectual or philosophical resources, even my deep religious beliefs, were helpless to comfort that great grief. For many days I was lost. From me had been taken the one dear and truly near living being, the one soul closest and eternally adherent to my own responses. Words of condolence, letters from my friends, the attempt to comfort me by other members of the family, filled not one tiny corner of that great void, nor opened even one fraction of an inch of the closed door. My mother had suffered for me in so many ways. She had lived so many hours of anxiety for me because of my wandering and pugnacious life. She had predicted my ascent. She had toiled and hoped too much and died before she was yet 48 years old. She had, in her quiet manner, done superhuman labors. She might be alive now. She might have lived and enjoyed, with the power of her maternal instinct, my political success. It was not to be. But to me, it is a comfort to feel that she, even now, can see me and help me in my labors with her unequaled love. I alone returned to the regiment. I finished my last months of military service, and then my life and my future were again distended with uncertainty. I went to Opeglia as a teacher again, knowing all the time that teaching did not suit me. This time I was a master in a middle school. After a period, off I went with Cesare Battisti, then chief editor of the Popolo. Later he was destined to become one of the greatest of our national heroes, he who gave his life, he who was executed by the enemy Austrians in the war, he who then was giving his thought and will to obtaining freedom of the province of Trento from the rule of Austria. His nobility and proud soul are always in my memory. His aspirations as a socialist patriot called to me. One day I wrote an article maintaining that the Italian border was not at Alla, the little town which in those days stood on the old frontier between our kingdom and the old Austria. Whereupon I was expelled from Austria by the imperial and royal government of Vienna. I was becoming used to expulsions. Once more a wanderer, I went back to Forli. The itch of journalism was in me. My opportunity was before me in the editorship of a local socialist newspaper. I understood now that the Gordian knot of Italian political life could only be undone by an act of violence. Therefore, I became the public crier of this basic, partisan, warlike conception. The time had come to shake the souls of men and fire their minds to thinking and acting. It was not long before I was proclaimed the mouthpiece of the intransigent revolutionary socialist faction. I was only 29 years old when at Reggio Emilia, at the Congress in 1912, 2 years before the World War began, I was nominated as director of the Avanti. It was the only daily of the socialist cause and was published in Milan. I lost my father just before I left for my new office. He was only 57. Nearly 40 of those years had been spent in politics. His was a rectangular mind, a wise spirit, a generous heart. He had looked into the eyes of the first internationalist agitators and philosophers. He had been in prison for his ideas. The Romagna, that part of Italy from which we all came, a spirited district with traditions of a struggle for freedom against foreign oppressions, knew my father's merit. He wrestled year in and year out with endless difficulties, and he had lost the small family patrimony by helping friends who had gone beyond their depth in the political struggle. Prestige he had among all those who came into contact with him. The best political men of his day liked him and respected him. He died poor. I believe his foremost desire was to live to see his sons correctly estimated by public opinion. At the end, he understood at last that the old eternal traditional forces, such as capital, could not be permanently overthrown by a political revolution. He turned his attention at the end toward bettering the souls of individuals. He wanted to make mankind true of heart and sensitive to fraternity. Many were the speeches and articles about him after his death. 3,000 of the men and women he had known followed his body to the grave. My father's death marked the end of family unity for us, the family.
This concludes today's reading of my autobiography, by Benito Mussolini. Join us also the day after tomorrow for the subsequent part. Subscribe to Major Intonio's channel. Thank you for listening, and so long.